Imagine a person who has dedicated his entire life to science, a convinced atheist who firmly believes that nothing comes after death. But one day, he encounters something so inexplicable that his usual perceptions of the world begin to break down. This is not a story about religion, but about the eternal questions that everyone asks themselves sooner or later. Is there a higher intelligence? In this video, you will learn about a phenomenon that made Hugo think about its existence. Was it just a coincidence or something greater? How can a single event change one's view of life and death? I am often asked, do you believe in God? I immediately respond, I do not believe in God. I do not believe in the image that people have created, where God sits on a cloud watching over the world. We have already explored the farthest corners of the universe, but we found no evidence of his existence anywhere. No deceased person has risen and told what happened to them. But once I encountered something inexplicable. This event will stay with me for the rest of my life, said Georgij Serich, a candidate of technical sciences. At a certain point in his life, he experienced an encounter that made him reflect on what happens after death and whether there is a creator of this world. Among the passers-by, I saw my deceased wife. This story happened several years after her death. That day, I was at the market, and suddenly, among the people, I saw my wife at one of the stands. I was so stunned that I couldn't move. It felt as though my body no longer obeyed. Meanwhile, she was calmly talking to the seller, as if nothing had happened. The scientist didn't dare to approach her immediately. He decided to observe her to make sure he wasn't mistaken. The longer he followed the unknown woman, the more he was convinced. Her face, her voice, her gestures, everything was exactly like his wife's. The woman made purchases and went to the bus stop. Georgij followed her. When the trolley bus arrived, she got on, and he sat down behind her without hesitation. When he was next to her, he began the conversation. "Excuse me, I have this strange feeling that we've met somewhere before." He didn't immediately tell her about his shock. Instead, he asked where she lived and what her profession was. It turned out that the woman was born in Leningrad and had spent her entire life there. However, his wife came from Siberia and had never been to Leningrad. But one fact surprised him especially. The unknown woman was a chemist, just like his deceased wife. The woman said that she had come to the city on a business trip and was planning to return home that very day. As the conversation continued, Georgij Serich admitted why he had approached her. He told her about his wife and the incredible resemblance between them. Georgij Serich's conversation partner was curious and asked him to show a photo of his deceased wife. However, the scientist did not have a photo with him, so he suggested bringing her a picture to her hotel. The woman replied that she would be flying home in a few hours, that she had unfinished business to attend to, and that there would be no time for a meeting. Georgij left her his phone number, and they agreed that she would call him when she was back in the city. Years passed, but the call never came. This incident bothered Georgij for a long time. He couldn't stop thinking, how is it possible to meet an exact copy of his deceased wife on the street? Even years later, when he told this story, he still felt uneasy. As a scientist, he strove to find a rational explanation. Could there be a phenomenon in our world where a person becomes the mirror image of another? I believe that after death, information is separated from the person. When the emotions subsided, Georgij began to analyze the situation carefully. Reflecting on the details, he had to admit that, despite the incredible resemblance, there was one difference between this woman and his deceased wife. The shape of her ears was slightly different. It is known that the ears of every person on Earth are unique. Even among twins, there are small differences. In this sense, one can call the ears a kind of second passport, Georgij Serich remarked. But how can the astonishing appearance in all other aspects be explained? The scientist was convinced that there are people in the world who are almost exact copies of other people, with only small differences. He called such people doppelgangers. These individuals could be born and live in completely different places on Earth. Many religious people believe that after death, the soul is separated from the body and moves to another dimension. Georgij did not believe in this. In his opinion, after a person dies, the information about them is separated. Perhaps it exists in the form of electromagnetic waves or some other unknown radiation. This information, Serich thought, returns to a kind of global sphere where it was stored before the person's birth. I believe that there's an information field, and that's exactly why people appear in the world who are amazingly similar to those who lived 200, 300, or more years ago, claimed the scientist. According to him, this field stores data that determines a person's appearance and then transmits it in the form of unknown radiation to Earth. That is why doppelgangers can appear simultaneously in different places. By the way, Georgij also explained the appearance of inventions on the same basis. How does a person make a scientific discovery? As an inventor and holder of more than 10 patents, Georgij Serich claimed that the ability to create something new had been passed down to him. However, his parents were ordinary people. So, where did this knowledge come from? I am convinced that somewhere far from Earth, there is a sphere that stores all knowledge about our universe. This knowledge exists in the form of an energetic carrier, which may be structured similarly to our mind, but much more complex and multi-layered. Georgij Serich explained that human thought moves faster than light, allowing our thoughts to spread over vast distances in a very short time. He believed that thoughts are also a kind of radiation and, under certain conditions, can reach the information center where a person experiences enlightenment and invents something new that did not exist before. Georgij claimed not to believe in God, but specified that he did not accept the image of God created by religions. He often said that he himself did not always encounter genuine faith among church representatives. However, in his reflections, he always returned to the idea that there is something more intelligent than humans, a higher power. Many people who watched the interview with Georgij Serich believe that his views are much closer to the concept of God than he himself realizes. Imagine living an ordinary life and suddenly, at the moment when the boundary between life and death blurs, you encounter something that you once perceived as myth or fantasy. What does it feel like to realize that beyond life, there exists something much more complex and mysterious than one could ever imagine? Today, we dive into the world of out-of-body experiences and discover what happens to a person when their body stops living. The revelations of researchers like Wagner Borges open up mysteries that we usually do not think about. Prepare yourself to encounter the unknown. What you will learn will change your perception of life after death. Earthly life is a school, and our planet is a classroom where we must learn a specific program. Depending on this program, events occur during our lives that are not the result of our choices, but experiences that are destined for us. However, we have free will, for example, in the way we absorb these experiences and how we will react to them, explains Brazilian researcher Wagner Borges, who has studied the phenomenon of out-of-body experiences for many years and actively practices them himself. In his interviews and lectures, he talks about his experiences and shares amazing details about the transition to another world, life on different levels, and how a person ends up in one level or another after death. The world without the world, to which a person transitions after their death, consists of many levels. Some researchers studying the afterlife divide it into 3 main levels: the lower, the middle, and the higher immaterial planes, explains Wagner Borges. The lower plane can be compared to purgatory, while the higher plane corresponds to heaven. The middle plane is the place for those who have lived a more or less righteous earthly life. This means that most deceased people will end up in this middle level. According to the researcher, if the program of earthly life is predetermined for the person, life in the immaterial world depends entirely on the individual's choices. To make this idea clearer, Borges uses an analogy. In childhood, we are guided by our parents, but when we grow up, we choose our own path. A person comes into this world with a consciousness that cannot predict what is best for them. It cannot know what exactly this or that soul needs to learn. Sometimes, a soul comes to this world to experience something that it is still missing, explains Wagner Borges. The experience that a person must have on Earth may be unexpected. The researcher is convinced that some souls come to this world, for example, to experience death through an earthquake. In this case, the person is born in a country where such disasters are common. During his out-of-body journeys, Borges claims to have observed the process of disembodiment. Many people who have experienced clinical death report passing through a tunnel, which, according to Borges, is an energy vortex resembling a tunnel. It is important to remember that a person has free will. When we are in earthly life, or, as Borges calls it, in the classroom, we do not choose the learning program, but we can decide how we learn it, whether well or poorly. We also have the option to finish the learning of this program earlier than intended. Our choices determine which level of the immaterial world we will land in after death. Our thoughts and emotions shape our spiritual body. After death, the person is the sum of everything they thought, felt, and did during their life. One could say that every dying person carries an energetic field that encompasses their entire life experience. People with a certain spiritual vibration will be drawn to the immaterial plane after death that corresponds to their energetic state. Of course, here is the text with the numbers written out. I often say that hell and heaven are portable things that you carry within yourself. If everything is fine with you, heaven is already inside you. If you maintain harmony in your body and mind, vibrations that resemble those within you will attract you, shares Wagner Borges his opinion. The lower immaterial plane, where spiritual beings land after death, is a heavy place because it reflects the state of those who are in this place. Here, you may encounter spaces that resemble slums, medieval cities, abysses, and dark caves. Those who gaze into these abysses see many spirits whose bodies are so dense that they cannot rise and leave this gloomy place. The researcher tells of an incident that happened to him during an out-of-body journey. When he was on the lower plane, he was surrounded by complete darkness, and he constantly felt that he was walking over crawling people. The only light source at this place was himself. Some inhabitants of this world stretched out their hands to him, called him an angel, and begged to be saved by him. Wagner Borges emphasizes that the punishment of these spiritual beings is not divine retribution. It is the result of their own actions on earth. All actions of a person, especially evil actions, leave an imprint on their spiritual body. An incident that Borges observed on the lower plane was the following. He saw a figure running down a dark street, screaming in fear, while pursuers chased after it. On the spiritual body of this figure, the researcher noticed numerous holes. According to Borges, this was the spirit of a person who had killed many people in life. After death, their own crimes took shape and began to chase them, creating eternal torment. Some souls find themselves in emptiness after death. This concerns those who decided to leave life prematurely. In the afterlife, they realize that this was not what they should have aimed for. It is not divine punishment, but natural consequence of their choices. This state teaches the soul that it must not harm itself or others. Such souls are forced to be reincarnated because they did not fulfill their earthly obligations. In their new life, they will face the same problems they tried to escape. During his research, Wagner Borges concluded that people who have committed a lot of wrong after death end up in the heavy areas of the lower plane. He also believes that Dante Alighieri tried to tell this in the 14th century. Borges thinks that Dante was an out-of-body traveler, but could not openly speak about it, as such revelations would have led to his destruction. Therefore, the poet concealed his knowledge and created the Divine Comedy. Although this is just a hypothesis, Wagner Borges claims that one can only be certain of one thing. One should not do wrong. There may be no divine punishment for it, but through their actions, a person creates their own environment. The one who causes suffering to others will sooner or later land in the place of their own victims. That is why it is written in the Holy Scriptures that one should do good. This is not a religious message, but rather a life code. The researcher is convinced